Hello, this is the Generally Bad Gamer, and today I'm going to talk a little more about Warcry. Today is a Warcry competitive talk. It's more of a discussion than anything. I'm going to talk about some opinions that I have about Warcry, especially when it comes to competitive balance and Warcry itself being a competitive game. So, the big question is Warcry competitive or capable of being a competitive game? There are a few things I hear about people saying that they don't believe it could ever be a competitive game. I've come up with some different talking points here. Number one, Warcry revolves around less complex rules than either Age of Sigmar or 40k. A lot of people say that this means that it can't be competitive because it is not as complex, it's simple. My counter to that is that being simple is not a bad thing. It does impact competitiveness in of itself. There are lots of games that are simple that are competitive. To be honest, the concept and basic rules of chess are very simple, though it is competitive because it involves player skill, player knowledge, player strategy, and overall it is super competitive. The second thing that I hear a lot of people say is that not all war bands are balanced and equal in Warcry, and that is true. Uh, there are some war bands that are better than others, but if you take a look at some of the videos out there, especially by the Salty Sea and some other content creators that talk about tier list or just how well most of the war bands are balanced, you will see that a lot of war bands fall into this middle section with a few that are incredibly powerful and a few that are fairly incredibly weak. But for the most part, they fall into this nice niche. Niche isn't the right word, but this nice spot where they can compete against each other. Now, my big counter to people saying that not all the war bands are balanced and equal is that this doesn't stop 40k from having a big competitive scene. And I'm going to use lots of GW references to talk about competitiveness in this because we are talking about Warcry, a GW game. Warhammer 40k has lots of different armies, factions, lists that you can run, and there are some of them that are so much stronger than other ones that they will completely blow out a bunch of those weaker lists in the competitive scene. It doesn't stop 40k from being competitive, and I don't think it's necessarily a downside to 40k being competitive. It's kind of the same in every type of game that involves chance to some kind, dice ruling, um, having a deck of cards, such as in Magic. There are going to be some decks that are just some decks, some armies, some lists that are just hedge your bets better. So, Warcry not having all the warbands being balanced, I don't think is a reason why it wouldn't be competitive. The third thing I hear people say a lot is that Warcry is a beer and pretzel style game. And this has really stuck with it. And yes, it can be a very fun game, and it is actually a very fun game to sit down and just play nonchalantly and casually with friends. I love it that way. It's great. And while this holds some merit, uh, it can also be addressed in a competitive sense, which I will get to here in a little bit. Being beer and pretzely, as people say it, kind of goes back to number one in the same regard: simple rules. It doesn't necessarily keep it from being competitive, but it does give it this perception that it's not made for competitiveness. And Warcry might not have been made for competitiveness, but doesn't mean it can't be competitive. Now, the fourth thing, and I think this is actually one of the biggest things when it comes to is Warcry currently competitive or capable of supporting the competitive scene, is that tournament play is not well supported at the moment. That's true, especially for now. Here in a little less than a week, we are going to see Adepticon, where we are going to see some of the first, I don't want to say big because they aren't big Warcry tournaments happening at Adepticon. They're only two 16-player tournaments, but the first kind of big show of I'm kind of trying to I don't even know how to describe this. It's the first time we will see competitive Warcry at a bigger convention alongside other types of competitive tournament games such as 40k, Age of Sigmar, and so on. So It is currently not well supported, but that is something that can change. Well supported in the tournament sense is what I mean. Now, means for balance and competitiveness. There are 6 things that I look at that can easily balance something to be more, well, easily create more balance and competitiveness in a game. 1 is a rules overhaul. 2 is ability reworks, and that's kind of specific to Warcry because we're looking at the rules themselves and saying what can help fix some imbalances. And these ability reworks could do that. 3, added rules, such as possibly passive abilities and added rules. I put added rules in there twice. I just now realized I did that. But yeah, that's where we're at. 4, points adjustments, at which we have seen GW already do. They just did some points adjustments in the Tournament of Champions 2021. 5, list building restrictions, which you typically will see at the tournament level. And then 6, tournament packs, which I don't know if there are any tournament packs for the Adepticon tournaments that are happening or not. I haven't heard of those. There are some restrictions and guidelines for the narrative event, but I haven't heard of any tournament packs hitting yet. But I'm going to talk about each of these 6 as options for creating balance and competitiveness within Warcry in a competitive sense. Rules overhauls. Pros are that you can completely rework rules and clean up downfalls of the current rule system. When you're completely redoing the rule system, you have free range to do whatever you want with it or whatever you see needs to be done to make it competitive and balanced. Now, the cons of this means that it's going to be a new edition, which comes with new books, possibly complete invalidation of previous materials, and of course, the second thing is that's more money out of the players' pockets. We will probably see a new edition of Warcry at some point, but this isn't an immediate way to get Warcry into that competitive scene. I have a 40k picture there, of course, because I think it just fits. I like this one. In the grim dark future, you don't have any money, which is oftentimes the case when you're playing a GW game. Now, the second thing that I had on that list was ability reworks. So, the pros of ability reworks is that you can do these with the current rules set, which means that you can keep the current edition and you just change the abilities of the warbands to bump up the power of underpowered warbands or lower the power of overpowered warbands, which is what I said in the number 2 of cons there. I mean, number 2 of pros. Now, the cons of this is that wow, I have a lot of typos in this one. This kind of change needs to come from the mothership typically itself to become official rules. 2 is even if ability reworks are undertaken and accepted by the competitive community, it will likely still lack widespread knowledge and support from GW. You would have to be in a pretty particular situation where GW will allow you to do official reworks of their rules, especially since they like to sell books. So far we're looking at complete rules overhauls and ability reworks aren't the way to go with kind of balancing Warcry and making it more competitive. Now, there are added rules. So, once again, added rules can be done with the current rule set. It allows changes to underpowered and overpowered abilities or warbands. Cons is that, once again, this typo, which I just copied and pasted, this kind of change needs to come from the mothership, the GW in this case, to most likely become rules, and even if undertaken by the competitive community, still lacks widespread knowledge and support from GW. So, really, the pros and cons of this are the exact same as what we just saw for ability changes. So, they're essentially the same pros and cons. Added rules, ability changes, you're looking at the same difficulty of adding them in. And since ability changes with the same pros and cons isn't really a feasible option at the moment, this isn't really a feasible option either. Now we're starting to get into territory that is more feasible and has actually happened. As I said, points adjustments. GW has already done this. So when I say the mothership, Magic refers to the mothership as WotC a lot of times. In this case, I'm referring to it as GW since they're the creators of Warcry, has already done this. They've already done points adjustments, and they do this regularly with their more competitive games, 40k and Age of Sigmar. So it would be reasonable that they would continue to do this for Warcry to make it competitive. Really, the only reason to do points adjustments in a game is to balance it out and make it more competitive. If it was purely beer and pretzel, points adjustments aren't really super needed. Two, it's easier to implement points adjustments on an event by event or competitive community basis. So you could have an event where you wanted a certain amount of balance or to discourage certain types of list, you could change points of units for that. Now, the cons of doing points adjustments independently is that it would require excellent and prompt communication on your part as the TO, tournament organizer. And this practice, I don't recommend doing this on an individual and an independent basis, but this practice can anger some players, make them feel like their warband's been singled out, different things like that. This points adjustment practice, I think, is a really nice, quicker solution to come from the creators of the game in official rules announcements or installments. I like this. This is a good starting point for making Warcry more competitive. Now we get into number 5 on my list there. List building restrictions. I think this is the first super reasonable approach to making Warcry more competitive on an individual independent basis. So, apart from GW supporting it by changing rules or redoing points, if you want to run a event, list building restrictions is the first reasonable way to run an event if you want to try to balance your meta or whether it's a local meta or just the meta in general. It's much easier to implement for an event or tournament, and your list building restrictions can even vary event to event. And a lot of times, list building restrictions can be built into a theme of the event. I saw that there was a tournament, Warcry tournament, that somebody did where it was elite based tournament. You could only take up to 7 or 8 models in the warband, I think is what they said, and they all had to be a certain point amount. Um, it worked something like that, so it really swarm lists didn't happen because they couldn't. And it really let some of those war bands like Stormcast Eternals and some of the other ones really shine since they fell into that elite category that often struggles a little bit in Warcry. Now, once again, the cons of doing list building restrictions is that it still requires excellent and prompt communication. Typically, when you create the event, when people are going to find out about it and possibly sign up for it, you want to let them know what's going on at that time. And you need to be on top of answering questions and addressing issues that might arise while while the players are still learning about the event, that is. Once again, list building restrictions can anger some players, make them feel like their warband is being singled out. If they only have a couple warbands or even one warband, it's a swarm warband, and you did an elite list, they might feel left out or singled out. So we come to number 6 on my list, and the one that I think is the most reasonable for running competitive Warcry events, and one that anybody can do. And I hope to see people start doing as they run competitive events for Warcry, and that's tournament packs. So, tournament packs. The pros of these is that they can also easily change event to event or be standardized. We see tournament packs chapter approved. Wow, and I've got a mirrored image there of the chapter approves. We see GW already creating these grand tournament packs and grand tournament books for 40k. Now, there's no reason why the tournament packs can't be made on the local or individual level. They work perfectly fine in that regard. And tournament packs are also more readily accepted method for competitive crowds. If you want to run a competitive event, giving them a tournament pack with expected missions, expected parameters that they have to follow, and all of that information about the tournament is really good. The cons, once again, we're talking excellent and prompt communication. When you have signed up for the event, when you announce the event, announce that there is at least going to be a tournament pack and get those players that tournament tournament pack. There we go. Trouble talking. As soon as you can, at least a couple weeks ahead of time, so that way they can list build around whatever is in the pack. A good tournament pack could encourage more balanced list building, but you want to give players the chance to decide if they want to take a certain type of list based on the possible missions that'll be run. Uh, but basically, if you aren't careful with a tournament pack, it can surprise players. So don't say we're running a tournament when they show up. Then you say, here's a tournament pack with things that are going to favor certain types list or not favor certain types list or just do whatever missions that they were expecting. That's going to surprise players. So be careful with your communication and be prompt with it. Now, as I said, tournament packs are my preferred method for not only running any type of tournament really, but also for turning Warcry into a functional competitive game. Warcry has several things that are great, interesting, unique, but it also has a few things that hinder competitive play. Being simple, as I said, isn't one of those hindrances. Uh, being simple with rules is fine. And I think that's one of the things that can make Warcry great as a competitive scene. It'd be fantastic to be able to get 5 or 6 games in without each game being 2.5 to 3 hours like in 40K. But what we are looking at, one of the biggest things that kind of hinders Warcry a little bit is the way the missions are. For your beer and press or casual games, the way the mission cards are set up is really awesome. It's fun for those casual games where you and your friend just want to see what happens to come up and run with it. Play a game based off of these random cards, random setups, random mission, all of that. Super fun. Not so great always for competitive play. Missions leading to incentives for list building are those biggest hindrances. So some missions, specifically from what I see a lot, treasure missions heavily favor certain lists and conditions. Treasure missions, for example, will favor lists that have fast flying models, especially if there is one treasure. If a speed 10 flying model can get a hold of that treasure, and the other army, the other warband is speed 5 and 6 at most, they're never catching them. And it just makes for a horrible competitive environment. The second thing that I think Warcry has going on that hinders competitive play is when reinforcements enter the battlefield, there is relatively little choice where they go or how they come into many missions. Once again, I love the idea of the dagger, shield, hammer, and it kind of giving you different setups and showing you when they come in and where they come in. But at the same time, this always having those reinforcements coming at a known spot, especially a very limited known spot, takes away a lot of the competitiveness of some of the missions. As if you happen to be the person that grabs a treasure and runs off, you know where exactly to run away from, and there's no risk of too much bad happening to you or really anything bad happening to you as long as you stay away from where those reinforcements are coming in. And third and finally, the thing with the missions is that it's all or nothing for one mission objective. I think 40K has a really good uh, objective system going on. It's pretty book heavy, so I don't think Warcry needs one that's as book heavy. But the fact that you have a primary objective and then secondary objectives that you bring to the game to help you in case you are sorely outmatched in that primary objective really kind of shores it up and makes it more competitive. So, missions. Some missions heavily favor one type of list and don't lend to list or warband diversity, especially when you would come to a competitive nature. Um, Warcry has some amazing casual missions and appears to be trying with match play pitch battles. And I like the fact that they're doing these match play pitched battles. There are still some of them that fall short, though. And I do think it is a lot of these ones that have treasure. I have Treasure Hunters here, which is actually one of the better treasure missions because it uses 5 treasures. But you're still looking at if you go second and they have 3 fast models, they're still going to be able to nab 3 of those treasures really quickly and then pull away. Now, this mission is also more balanced. This particular one is also more balanced where the reinforcements come in because the reinforcements will come in behind where your 2 groups start. So your enemies will come in behind you. So there is less room to run away. But but it's still not the most well balanced mission, I don't think, because of the nature of how it works. And also just being limited where your reinforcements come in. So if the missions were to be more balanced in several ways, which I'll discuss here in a second, then that would allow for more diverse list building and a wider range of warbands to be considered competitive. Now, I mentioned reinforcement deployment. I really like the way Catacombs does this. They have it set up. On the left is a Catacombs map. You will see each of those red circles is an entry point to the map. And when you set up your reinforcements in the third round of a Catacombs game, because there's 5 rounds, you and your opponent will alternate taking turns setting up at one of those spots. So if an enemy has retreated to one side, you can have your models enter in closer to where they are, as opposed to being a set location that they are going to know about. Now, the thing I want to know is why hasn't this been implemented into our above ground maps that we see? So, this unseen blade setup here has the shields set up towards the center, and then around 2, the hammers and daggers come in. But they're in set spots. So, you know where they're going to come in, and if you're already outclassing your opponent as far as model quality, and the objective just you're just favored in the objective, you can easily avoid where they're going to come in. So why doesn't it do something similar where you have points to choose from? So why not just say when you come in, those 4 circles and those hammer and dagger spots are all points that you and your opponent can set your reinforcements up similar to how they're set up on the catacombs board. I think something like this that can be easily done in a mission pack would be something that would be more balanced and lead to a better competitive scene. Now, secondary objectives or hidden agendas could be a good way to also supplement competitive games. Hidden agendas are used in some, uh, I believe, narrative style tournaments, and I really like them overall. I haven't looked through all of them, so I don't know if all of them are well suited for a competitive nature, but what they typically do is you will choose one each battle you play, and over the course of the tournament, you can't choose the same one twice. But when you meet the objective of it, or at the end of the game, you will reveal it, and if you met the objective of it, you will get a victory point typically. Now, there are enough hidden agendas that for a 5 round tournament, you could easily have 2 of them per tournament. You could have one be revealed at the beginning of the game, one hidden, like they normally are, both hidden, both revealed, whatever, but they could be supplemental victory points in case a certain mission heavily favors one of the sides, because then you could battle for some objectives, denying your opponent their secondary objectives or the hidden agendas, and you battle for yours to try to win the game. So that really everything I mentioned here, the fixed to reinforcement deployment, the secondary objectives or hidden agendas all add to those decisions that are oftentimes seen in competitive games. Once again, chess is all about decisions. 40K is seen as competitive because it has lots of decisions in it. When having these decisions, it allows more opportunity for the more knowledgeable or the more skilled player to come out on top. So, some of the explosive nature of Warcry, while still important, such as rolling crits, isn't nearly as important as it would be if you everything was standardized and straightforward right off the bat. These decisions you would make with where to place your reinforcements to come in, and which secondary objectives or hidden agendas to take, which ones to save for later, can be some good competitive decisions that lend to a healthy and interesting competitive Warcry scene. So that's my opening discussion for Warcry in a competitive nature. I am looking into trying to run some events. A Warcry tournament at Origins Game Fair, which happens in Columbus, Ohio in June, and Gen Con in Indianapolis, which happens at the beginning of August. I've submitted events for Warcry, each one of those a tournament. We'll see if they happen. If they do, I will let the community know. And hopefully, after Adepticon has its two Warcry tournaments, competitive Warcry will continue on. I do think it would benefit from tournament packs being created for the events and possibly even standardized by the community at large for events. But that is part of the discussion I wanted to open up with this video. So I apologize for some of the sloppiness of the slides. There were a bunch of typos. Um, I wasn't quite as well spoken this time as I normally am, but this is something that I wanted to put together really quickly, so I slapped it together really fast. I wanted to start this discussion, especially with Adepticon coming up in less than a week. All right. So if you enjoyed this content, I will be having more content come out in the near future. I'm hoping to have a couple more pieces of Warcry content come out this coming week. If you like Warcry or Warcry content in general, there are also some other great content creators out there. The Salty Sea being one of the fantastic ones that I recommend. Look up the Salty Sea. He does some really good content, especially when it comes to the competitiveness and strong list building with Warcry. So, as always, this is the Generally Bad Gamer, and I hope everyone has a good one.